With Gears 5, the Coalition have put the Gears of War franchise firmly back on track, and it's no surprise that already, many, ourselves included, are dreaming of a sequel. And unless things go horribly wrong, which remains pretty unlikely, there will be a sequel. But where would we like to see said sequel take the franchise? Well, Gears 5 makes plenty of improvements to a tried and tested formula, but we have a few more suggestions for how things could be even better. In this feature, we'll be going over a few of these. Do note that there might be some minor spoilers for Gears 5 in this feature. Without further ado, let's get started. Call it Gears of War 6. Okay, seriously though, let's actually get started. More Marcus Phoenix. Marcus Phoenix instantly became one of the most recognizable faces in the industry with the original Gears of War, and with all the sequels that followed, his popularity only grew. With Gears of War 4, the Coalition introduced a new set of primary characters, who continue to be at the forefront with its sequel. And this means that in spite of still very much being in the thick of things, Marcus and co have been pushed to the sidelines. It's clear now that Kate and the other new characters the Coalition have created and developed are capable of shouldering the spotlight's burden. But in Gears 6, we're hoping Marcus Phoenix has much more of a presence than he did in Gears 5. He was, to be fair, a pretty big presence in Gears of War 4 as it was, while in Gears 5 he's still very much in the fold, in spite of being less prominent. But as this new saga continues to ramp up, we're hoping that Marcus too will become a lot more prominent. Playable Marcus Phoenix. We get that the Coalition are trying to establish the younger generation of Gears characters as the new primary protagonists, and honestly, they've been doing a pretty good job of it. We're not saying that we want Marcus to completely hog the limelight. I, for one, would love to see where Kate's story goes, but it would be great and an absolute treat for series fans to be able to play as him once again, even if it's just for a single chapter, or an even smaller section of the game, perhaps in a flashback. Hey, it could work. More backstory for newer characters. Getting back to the new guard though, the Coalition deserve credit for how well they've introduced a completely new set of characters. Gears of War 4 may have left something to be desired, but there's no doubt that in Gears 5, Kate, Del, and JD all become significantly more compelling characters, while even the newly introduced Faz is sure to have made a lot of fans. So what should Gears 6 do with them? Well, the first order of the day should be to give us more backstory for as many of them as possible. It goes without saying that we'll be learning more about Kate, but I'd love to learn more about the others as well. Gears 5 hinted at some very interesting stuff in the past for JD, Del, and Faz, and I think most fans would want to learn more about their COG days pre-Gears 4. More narrative choices. Gears 5 did plenty of stuff that this series has never done before. One of those things was to present players with a pretty major narrative choice at a crucial juncture. To avoid spoilers though, we're not going to talk about what that was or when it happened, but we do hope that we see more of this kind of thing. Having a branching narrative isn't something that we ever thought Gears of War would do, but that moment in Gears 5 was very exciting. Seeing the outcome of that choice is one of the biggest reasons to be excited for Gears 6, and we're hoping the series continues down this road by offering players even more opportunities to shape that narrative. More dynamic open areas. Gears 5 literally blew things open by setting the bulk of its missions in open world-ish environments, and without a doubt, having the freedom to slow down the pace and tackle interesting side missions was something that added a lot to the proceedings. The only problem was, Gears 5's open world areas were a bit empty. Actually, to be honest, they were completely empty. They were static, and they had nothing to do, and they basically just served as places connecting several small and large mission areas. But there's no doubt in most people's minds that the Coalition shouldn't abandon this approach with Gears 6. We're just hoping that the sequel's open world areas will be a bit more dynamic and offer some more stuff to do. One particular section in Gears 5's second open world area sees players sailing the skiff through a furious wind flare, and that's the sort of stuff that would add a lot to these areas. Add wind flares as dynamic weather rather than just static sequences, add random enemy encounters, just anything to make the world feel more alive. More boss and mini-boss encounters. Gears of War has always excelled at throwing new and dangerous enemies at players, and Gears 5 was no different. From the terrifying Warden to the formidable Flock, there were constant encounters with harder-to-beat enemy types throughout the game. Not to mention a couple of set-piece boss encounters that absolutely stole the show. So what do we want from Gears 6 in this area? More. Just more. Just keep doing what you've been doing. Introduce more new enemy types, and keep throwing them at us for even more thrilling and memorable encounters. Double down on Jack. Of the many changes Gears 5 makes, the one that affects moment-to-moment gameplay the most, arguably even more than the open world areas, is Jack. The bot changes up combat considerably, and everything from upgrading him to looking for components to using his various abilities during firefights makes the game significantly better. Hopefully, this is something Gears 6 will double down on. Add more abilities for Jack to learn, add more variety to his upgrades, maybe even add branching upgrades to make things more interesting. Jack makes Gears of War's already stellar combat even better, and further improvements in this area should be a no-brainer for the inevitable Gears 6. Combat improvements. Other than Jack, there are a few other ways Gears 6 can improve Gears 5's already excellent combat. Another thing that Gears 5 does to add some dynamism to its firefights was to add the element of player choice, so that rather than being forced into encounters, players now often have the ability to start encounters on their terms. This, more often than not, translates to the ability to stealthily take out enemies who are unaware of your presence, and that's an area that Gears 6 could do with some improvements in. Gears 5's stealth mechanics are functional, but that's really all that they are, and while it would be more than just a little foolish to expect Gears 6 to turn into a full stealth game, one could hope for better stealth mechanics. Giving us the ability to crouch, improve enemy AI during stealth, and even more areas that are specifically designed to offer player paths that they can take to keep out of enemies' vision for at least a little while. Beyond stealth, there are still some other ways that Gears 6 could take what Gears 5 does and expand on it, like using the environment to our advantage. For instance, there are multiple sections in Gears 5 that allows the player to shoot ice out from under the feet of advancing enemies to drop them into the water below for instant kills. More of that please, Gears 6. Crafting and upgrading. This is something Gears of War has never done, but if you think about it, it'd make things pretty interesting. I'm not saying Gears of War would go into complete RPG territory and make players craft potions of all things, but having the ability to craft better gear and armor, or having the ability to upgrade weapons might not be such a bad idea for a Gears game. I know a lot of the fun in a Gears of War game comes from constantly picking up new weapons that you find in the field, but Gears 5 allows you to store a couple of weapons on your skiff, and using something like that to leverage crafting and upgrading mechanics would be a nice way to strike a balance between these two approaches to handling weapons and gear. 4-player co-op. Gears of War 3 introduced 4-player co-op for its campaign, which was a decision that proved to be very popular, but it's not something that the series has done again under the Coalition. Gears of War 4 cut that number down to 2 players, while Gears 5 offered a maximum of 3 players, with the Coalition not wanting to be restricted in terms of storytelling by how many characters were in a scene at any given time. While their justification is completely understandable, hopefully Gears 6 will offer 4-player co-op in its campaign once again, and hopefully the Coalition will find a way to make it work without having to sacrifice anything in the storytelling department. An option for a classic Horde mode. Horde mode was an absolute revelation when Epic Games introduced it in Gears of War 2, and it's only gone from strength to strength since then. In Gears 5, with hero shooter elements and a great many other bells and whistles, it's probably the best thing the game has to offer on the multiplayer side of things. But as good as it is, you know what I really miss? That classic vanilla Horde mode from Gears 2. Just you, with 4 of your friends fighting against wave upon wave of enemies with nothing else to think about. Now, don't get me wrong, Gears 6 should absolutely build on the improvements that all Gears games since 2 have made to the Horde mode. Horde modes are a dime a dozen these days, and a vanilla experience by itself would be a bit of a disappointment. But what would be the exact opposite of a disappointment, though, would be having the option to play classic Horde matches. Hopefully, Gears 6 will improve upon Gears 5's Horde mode, while also offering the option to play good old vanilla Gears 2 Horde. And that wraps it up. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing to our channel. We upload new videos daily. Also, don't forget to switch on the bell notification icon, that way you don't miss out on any of our videos.